Well, good Friday to you and welcome to High Noon. You may notice that I am not Bob Daney. I have more hair than he does, it's just shorter. But he's awake today and you're going to have to put up with me, and I apologize for that to start with. But it sure is good to see you guys here. It's a nice crowd for a Christmas season. I expect the crowd to get lower and lower toward Christmas because there's a lot of grandmas and grandpas who need to go visit grandchildren for Christmas time. And I'm one of those too. I have grandchildren away that I'll have to go visit. But I'll do it some other day than Friday because it's important that we have me here for High Noon Club because I like being here. By the way, those who don't know me, my name is Paul Sutherland. And we're going to start our High Noon Club as usual. We'll start with a prayer and then we will have a pledge allegiance to the flag. So let's stand and pray. Reed, do you mind praying this morning?
Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the many blessings that you've granted to us each and every day. Father, it's in you that we live and move and have our very being. And you have so blessed us in many ways, ways that we can't even count. But we have freedom to gather here. We have freedom to worship you as we see fit and in accordance with your scripture. We enjoy food. We enjoy abundance and so many things. We are so blessed as a nation. Well, we want to ask your blessings upon our meeting today. And Father, we thank you so much for your Son, Jesus, who, though we are all sinners, because we have him and the sacrifice that he made on our behalf, that we are continuously cleansed by his blood and made perfect and acceptable to you. Father, we pray for those who deny Christ, who don't know it. And Father, we pray that those of us who are called by your name will stand up in the public sector and defend our faith and not let it be blasphemed. Father, again, I thank you for the blessings that you've granted to us. For those of us who are eating here, we ask that you bless this food to the nourishment of our bodies. And we thank you, Father, for those who prepared it for us. God bless America. This prayer, Father, I offer you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. You know, the Bible talks about feeding the Spirit and tasting the Holy Spirit, and I kind of tasted a roast beef sandwich in that prayer.
It was a friendship.
All right, let's pledge allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. You can have a seat. It's good to have all of you with us this morning. We're going to move on to our guest today. Michael, come on up here to the microphone. It's good to have you with us. I want you to tell us about OCPA. Give us about a 3-minute explanation of who you are and what you do and what your goals are, and then you can give us information about upcoming legislation this year.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? And if you all are okay with it, you mind if I unblind this, but by the last name Carnuccio, you might be able to figure out that I can't stand behind the podium very well, or it might fall over. Well, thank you all so much for having me. The very first
Italians acting like that.
very first thing I'd like to do, I see someone who has served our country and the distinction and honor of wearing the uniform here. I know several of you are. Can you raise your hand if you've served the country or community? And let us all start with a round of applause and thank you. I am a grandson of 2 World War II veterans, one in the Navy and one in the Army that hit Normandy. And I am before you today doing what I do in my life and leading my life because I was raised by those 2 grandfathers and came to understand patriotism at a very young age and the sacrifice that went into it, and that sticks with me. And so no matter where I am and where I speak, and we've taken this on at OCPA too, that's the very first thing we do is thank you for our freedom and for defending us. I'm the president of the Oklahoma Council of Public Affairs. This last year I also founded a group and became the president and CEO of a national 501c3 nonprofit called the Liberty Foundation of America. And I work in those capacities, and what we do at OCPA is every day we look for public policy perspectives. We conduct research and look at the outcome of public policy with respect to free enterprise. How do we expand, either protect, which we're doing a lot of right now, working in that category, but also how do we expand economic freedom? How do we put more power back in the hands of the people? The Liberty Foundation was established off of that because we believe that the locus of power on decisions, if we're going to govern people, need to be as close to the person of the taxpayer as possible. And so in every answer and in conversations that we're going to have today and in discussion back and forth, you're going to notice that I'm going to come back to that. And I'm going to say that, you know what, my family lives out in, we're in that weird part of town where we're in Oklahoma City limits, but we have a Yukon mailing address and we're in the Mustang School District. I don't know what the state wants to do with us, but we're out there. And so, you know, in Edmond, you all may have something come up next year that I may love or I may think is crazy, but it's your decision in Edmond. And I shouldn't tell you what to do. And we darn sure shouldn't have somebody in West Virginia telling you what to do or at the UN telling you what to do. And so that concept of bringing the locus of power as close as we can back to the taxpayer and the citizen is a central theme for us. I said economic liberty because one of the issues at OCPA, the questions we get all the time, is about what you would consider social political issues, of which my colleagues, Rachel Hayes and Brandon Dutcher, who many of you all know are here, will tell you our board and our organization, our individuals, have very strong opinions on those issues. But as an organization, our charter is set up on economic issues, on taxes and budget and the size of government and spending issues. So that's where we keep our focus. However, at OCPA, we conduct a meeting once a month called the Center-Right Coalition Meeting, where a lot of the organizations that are from the center to the right that work on public policy, we'll bring them in at OCPA and bring lawmakers in to talk about legislation and on issues. And 90% of those groups are in the space that OCPA doesn't act in every day, but we believe in those issues, and this is one of the ways we try to facilitate it. You'll notice most of the speakers that OCPA is known for bringing in, whether they're governors like Scott Walker a few years ago, President George W. Bush this past year, Sarah Palin a few years back. We'll bring speakers in, and we don't bring them in and say, you can only talk about taxes. We bring them in and say, we want to talk about liberty. And we want to talk about the challenges today and what we can do. And a lot of times they'll address those issues that OCPA may not be doing core research on. But that is another focus of ours. And finally, the last reason that I'm here today is because I am a father. I'm a husband, a devoted husband, and a father of 2 young children. Joseph is 3 years old, and Thomas just turned 20 months old. In fact, normally during the day I roll my sleeves up and everything, but I kept this shirt on from something I had to do this morning because my cufflinks say Dad, and I got them as the first gift I ever received from my son. Okay, my wife, but you know, my son gave it to me first. I'm now into the tie phase, by the way. This past birthday, I got my first tie from my son, which is like a big dad moment. But anyway, but every day I wake up, and no matter what time, you know, yesterday morning I had a 6 a.m. flight that I flew out, and so at 4:30 before I left, I went into their room and looked at them. Because that's why I get up, and that's what I do. And everything I work on, I think about their future. And it takes everything I have right now not to be fighting mad about what we're doing to their future. About the budget deal that was just passed, that means nothing, but what it's going to do to their future. My son Joseph was born, and I don't know if you all know of the advanced food company in Enid that emerged a few years ago, but Paul Allen, one of the founders, who's very involved he's the chairman of the Liberty Foundation, he's been very involved with OCPA. The day Joseph's born, October 12, 2010, I send out a little note, and I get a message back from him, and he says, "Congratulations, have you told him he's $44,000 in debt?" And right, I you know, normally I laugh, and when I tell that I laugh. At that moment, it was, you know, it kind of sunk. And all of a sudden, I was in this not because it's logical or the math makes sense, you know, or because this is what the founding fathers believed, and I buy into that. I believe in the concept of freedom, but it took a deeper meaning. And so I'm not one of the people that when we go into legislative fights or we go into issue advocacy discussions when we lose. I'm not one of the people that says John Roberts ruled and all of a sudden we just have to accept Obamacare. I don't accept that because it's not acceptable for my children. And so that's why I'm here. Thank you. So that's, see you give an Italian a microphone and tell me to take 2 or 3 minutes, and we're like 15 minutes later we're on dessert now. But anyway, what else can I help with?
You're fine. Just
okay.
Now your legislation that you
great. I want to talk. Jonathan Small, my colleague, who is like 30 times smarter than I am. I know he's been here, and I know he's going to be here right before session to talk to you all some more after all bills are filed. And so he'll go a lot more in depth. There's a couple of those issues I'd like to talk to, but one of the main things that I'd like to get to is a tactical conversation about how we start to move the ball forward and how we're successful next year. And I say that because the first thing, right, is you got to get past denial, and we have to accept the fact that we are losing. And we're losing, and I'm here to tell you today, in my opinion, we're losing. It's our own fault. Now that what? You know, what does that mean? And I'll get to that. And I'm not blaming any of this, but there's a reason. A lot of times, somebody will look and they'll say, "Well, the president of OCPA is going to High Noon Club." Well, that's kind of preaching to the choir, right? And I say exactly. That's what I want to talk to, because I don't know about you, but when I grew up, the congregation is always looking up to the choir, and the choir's responsibility is to bring the Word of God and lift up everyone in the audience. And bring them into the celebration and elevate the conversation and the spirit of everyone in the room. And so when I think about what we need to achieve and why we're losing right now, the very people that I want to talk to is the choir, because I think you all are the leaders that are in the power positions to have the most influence on success tomorrow. I think it's very important that we still get involved with a lot of groups that we may not say are we're trying to educate the masses on these issues and bring people into the fold. Don't get me wrong. But for what next year looks like, this is the most important group, I think, that we could be spending time together talking to. So here's why I mean that we're losing, and I think it's our fault, and why I wanted to talk to you all. There are several different issues that we're each passionate about in this room. The issue that may be number one on my personal list right now, and it's partially because this is a huge focus for OCPA, is the penalty to work that we have in the state of Oklahoma. The fact that we charge an income tax, the fact that our state, when you all go, the very first thing that we do is we have to pay tribute to the state, 5.25% of everything someone does. I think it sends the wrong message. I think it's the wrong thing to do with people's resources, and I think it's just morally wrong for us to have a state income tax. Now, I'm not going to get up here and preach against all form of taxation or anything else. I understand that if we want to have a public safety, or if we want to have certain services that the community of Edmond or Yukon or whatever may decide, that there is a portion of contributing. I get all that. I'd much prefer where we talk about flat tax, fair tax, consumption-based taxes. I think is a much better way to run society. But for me, and for those of us at OCPA right now, the penalty to work, punishing people to work, and the posture to say that the very first thing you're going to do after you get up, the first amount of time that you spend working is going to go to the state, it is the wrong posture for a community to have. And so for us, that's a big issue. It's a number one issue. School choice is a very big issue for me personally. Freedom, educational freedom for parents and children to be able to decide. The fact that we have people right now in the state of Oklahoma, in our communities not too far from here, that are trapped in poor and failing schools. And they are forced to go to those schools and forced into that cycle of life, forced into indoctrination by the government just because of where they live or their socioeconomic means. That violates everything our founding fathers stood for, and our representative democracy is supposed to be protecting. So those are two big issues for us. Now, what you didn't hear in there that I know are big issues in this room are topics like Common Core and Agenda 21 and term limits in Oklahoma City. Listen, in addition to everything that Paul, that you said earlier, and I know that you're talking about with term limits, the foundation of our constitutional republic that the founding fathers established was based on this premise that Reed's going to come and serve a couple of years and bring his talents, and then he's going to go back to his line of work. The whole concept of a career politician was not in when the Declaration of Independence was written and when the Constitution was put together. They didn't think about doing that. And so that's a basis for this whole argument on term limits. If we're not going to follow one of the founding principles this country was established, let's lock it in and make sure that we're forced to. Because that's one of the most important things. Sorry about that. Can everybody hear me better now? So anyway, but Common Core and Agenda 21 and term limits and these other issues that are very important, and we would, sitting here talking with you, I will talk with you and agree with you. And outside of the 8 to 5 timeline of what OCPA is doing, those issues are very important to many of us. In fact, Brandon and I talk all the time, especially about the issue of Common Core. But we're a nonprofit. You only have a certain amount of time. When you were at the city council meeting the other night, you couldn't also be at a rally in another part of the city on another issue that you may be very passionate about. But I recognize that there are soldiers on the front lines fighting that issue that are out there. And when we look around on the income tax issue, especially 2 years ago when it was at the forefront of the state, we got out there pretty heavy and we were alone. There weren't a lot of other groups that were out there pushing this issue. Yet when I said that we should stop penalizing people to work and it's a moral issue, every head in here nodded. We all agree. But we all have those issues. Now, here's what I'm getting to. The challenge that we have on our side of the fence is that we end up getting into turf battles. That if I'm working on the income tax issue and you're not because you're working on term limits, well, that's a cost to me. And I might lose because you're not with me. Why aren't you talking about income taxes? And she could say the same thing about me with term limits. But what's really happening is we're all pushing these issues forward. We're challenging the status quo. And we're advancing liberty on multiple fronts. And I'm bringing this up because the paradigm, the other side of the aisle, I want you to think about what happened in 2007 and 2008. Hillary Clinton was guaranteed to be the Democrat nominee for president, right? I mean, it started the second that George Bush won in 2004. Hillary Clinton, here it came, right? And all the cable news outlets, everything you'd read, it was presidential nominee Clinton. And all of a sudden, here comes the Chicago Mafia that brings forward and pushes this senator who barely had any experience, right? And they went through a primary. And remember a couple of those ads? Barack Obama ran a couple ads against Hillary Clinton that were pretty scathing and hit her pretty hard, and she ran a few back. But the second that primary was wrapped up, what happened? They all locked in, and the Clinton war machine, which you can probably tell to this day, the Clintons and the Obamas hate each other. You might think it is harder for anybody to have a bigger problem with the Barack Obama White House than those of us in this room. But the Clintons they don't play second fiddle too far. But yet, it was in their best interest to have power controlling it, what they wanted done, and they all got together. And they ended up winning the presidency in now 2 terms, and Hillary's been able to do everything and screw up something and violate the principle of this country and what happened in Benghazi, and she's been able to get away with it because they all banded together. Contrary, what's happened on the other side? We've gone presidential cycles where we have had just about, pick a number, who wants to get on stage, right? And we've had primaries of 8 to 9 people, which if we're all honest in this room, even if we like someone, we knew this person doesn't have a shot at winning. But man, I like that they're there and I like what they're saying. And what happens by the time we're done our primary? We've bloodied up whoever our eventual nominee becomes. And then here's the kicker. This is the worst part. A chunk of our base stays at home. Well, folks, this is math. And I know we're not teaching very well in the school system today, but at least you and I understand the concept of math. They band together and multiply their numbers. We take 30% off. We'll never win. And then we get into a deal last week where we were just talking about this, Reed, right? Paul Ryan says, look, this isn't the best budget deal, but our biggest problem is, what do you want us to do? There's everything the House is doing, which they say it should be doing, right? Investigations into the NSA. Investigations into Benghazi, slamming everywhere they can on the Affordable Care Act, right? And on all everything they do gets to the Senate, and that's where things go to die. And until you have numbers in the Senate, and Tom Coburn, Dr. Coburn had a conversation with me a few years ago on this, and I was arguing with him because there were a couple senators in some races going into 2012 that he had endorsed or backed or was part of, yep, they have a chance. And I thought, that person, I don't agree with that person. there's a couple of issues there that I'm not comfortable with. There was a guy, Castle, in Delaware. I don't know if you remember, was supposed to be the nominee there in the Senate that everyone thought would happen. And I wasn't comfortable with him. And one of the points he made is he said, remember, when we won and when we really took some great strides was the Reagan Big Tent idea. If we're there 70% of the time or 80% of the time, we'll work on the other 20%, but at least we're there 80% of the time. And we can get 80% of the things done. Right now, we're losing 80% of the ground every time, right? And the other thing he said is, the way the U.S. Senate's make up, and our lawmakers here can explain this, your legislative bodies, you have caucuses or factions within those legislative bodies. And if you have 51 senators, so you control the U.S. Senate, and 26 or 27 of them are conservatives, you control the U.S. Senate. And now with the way the numbers are, and see, this is where the overreach can work against them. Now what started happening, if you do control the U.S. Senate, look at everything that's happened with the 60 votes that are needed and even just 51 votes now that are possible. And so it becomes so important that at times we get to a point and I say, man, I was really with this guy or gal, but they lost me on this particular issue. And say, I'm not getting behind them. And then we lose that seat. And then I spend my time coming here and complaining to you about how, even in Oklahoma, government has grown in the last 4 years almost 20%. Think about that. Now, that's not all at the state level, right? This is total spend. These are sources of resources that are coming from all different angles. And there's not, it's not one thing we can point to and say it's this person's fault or this happened. But at the federal level, too, after the fights we've been going through for the past 24 months, and after coming to the brink of shutdown and putting our foot down on spending and the direction of the country, we've now come to a budget deal where the agreement that everyone had was, well, we'll actually not do those cuts we just fought over. We'll just put them off 10 years, where other people will be in here, and they'll just put them off again. And that's the system we've gotten to. And it's broken, and it just doesn't work. And so I'm coming here today a little bit to preach to the choir and say, I know you love this song, and I love this song, and you love this song, and we're going to sing them all. But if we work together and we sing them all in service, we'll have a much better experience the rest of the week than if we don't work together as much on particular issues. And I'm not saying we have problems with that. This is a general theme because you all have spheres of influence that you go back to and you work with and folks that you know about. But this is a common challenge, and through the Liberty Foundation, I'm seeing it in other states. Get this for this point. And I'll tell you quite honestly, while I thought that with our fiscal and economic challenges, someone that had quite a bit of experience in finance and economics and everything, that Mitt Romney might be able to address some of those, but he was not my first choice, nor my second or third choice. And I'm telling you that candidly. But when we look at the state of Ohio, a battleground state that we had to win, and we look at the fact that less people showed up to vote on the Republican side of the ticket in the 2012 election than had showed up in the primary for the 2008 election. That's a problem. When we look at the state of Florida, and here's the other kicker, 55,000 votes would have won the state of Ohio if Romney got 55,000 more votes, because Obama had won by 109,000 votes. In the state of Florida, the margin was even closer. And there, you had less people show up for the general election than had showed up in the primary election. Mike Huckabee got more electoral votes in the 2008 primary in the state of Ohio than Mitt Romney did in the general election in 2012. Think about that. Now, if Mitt Romney was president today, would we all be singing Kumbaya and jumping around, or would we still be complaining about government? Right, we would still be fighting the fight. Would we be fighting the same fight? Would we be on shaky ground where it feels like there's nowhere else we can go, our backs are in a corner, or would we have at least a little bit of room, right? Would issues like the Benghazi scandal be moving much more forward? Would we be talking a lot more about it? Would we have more influence on NSA and these issues? So this is the concept, right? Now, the one thing that I would never ask anyone to do, and in fact I would encourage you to fight if anyone puts you in this corner, is to ever give up on your principle. You should always stand on principle and never compromise your principle. I'm not asking you to do that. I'm just asking us to be a little bit more strategic and a little bit more tactical when we're talking with groups and what we can do in order to start winning. and start winning. And it's not all electoral. I use those examples, but there's other issues. The income tax issue for us was a clear one. There are on school choice issues where we will get families and get parents and get everyone together that are so committed, and they'll get up to the Capitol and they'll talk about this, and we'll have lawmakers that are fighting against the OEA and facing phone calls in their office and everything, but they're standing on principle. And then we'll go across the state and we'll go talk with groups, and they could care less if we had educational choice or if we had freedom for parents and children. And that's what I'm talking about when some of these issues bubble up, is trying to band together on them. Now, what do I think is promising going into next year before we kind of open up for some conversation and discussion? I think that right now, the Affordable Care Act, as we all knew it would, is collapsing on its own. And partially, let me take a sidestep and say, because of the way leveraging the Constitution, states had the right and had the power, and by rejecting the expansion of Medicaid, and by rejecting state exchanges, states have crumbled Obamacare. They have done states, and so in the state of Oklahoma, and for our lawmakers that are here and the others that aren't here that you all may see and know, standing strong on that, and I say that because I don't think we realize the amount of money that the hospital industrial complex is pouring in to try to get Medicaid expanded in the state of Oklahoma. How many lawmakers are hearing that, oh, our hospital is going to close tomorrow and people are going to starve and we're going to send it to you and it's your fault? And how many checks they're writing right now, right before session starts, to try to go to campaign coffers. And so the fact that we have lawmakers that are standing strong on that, that is a principled decision that is happening in a district in Oklahoma that impacts the decision of a state that is transforming the posture of the country. That is what our founding fathers, but that's federalism at its finest. And that is something to be applauded when you see our lawmakers that are standing strong on that. But I bring this up to say this one thing. So the Affordable Care Act is going in our favor in the fact that it's crumbling. And so in your battleground Senate races, in your battleground districts going into 2014, in the state of Oklahoma, in some seats where we may have legislators that are term limited and others that are looking to come in, so it could be an open seat, this issue is going in our favor. And so I have hope for next year. You only need 6 seats to take over the U.S. Senate if you hold all the seats that you have. Things are working in our favor. Now, admittedly, last time I would have told you Missouri, all the numbers said Missouri was in our favor too. And up until we got to late August, early September, Missouri was in our favor. And so anything can happen. I understand that. But I'm just saying we have cause for hope. And I think something else that is working in our favor are these issues. Benghazi, that word and that issue, that is starting to take hold with the American populace when you look at public opinion numbers. The NSA issue, I mean, you have Jay Leno and David Letterman cracking jokes every night about the NSA. Listen, it's pop culture now to make fun of the fact that those of you who are alive earlier than I was, when we were really in the middle of the Cold War, and you had to go through all that experience, could you imagine that one day pop culture in America would be to joke about the fact that your government was spying on you and tapping into you and everything? Think of where we are. But that's where it is. Distrust in government, that word in general, is at an all-time high in the United States right now. And that has an impact at the state, local, and federal level. Those issues, for those of us that are talking about freedom and liberty, those issues, that works in our favor. So the numbers are working in our favor. And I say this all coming out of last Saturday. I am an OSU graduate and a painful OSU fan. Thank you. And while Bob Stoops coached a great game and the Sooners played very hard, I have a hard time believing that we didn't lose that game. Stoops is owning Gundy. Like, what's going on, right? 9 out of the last 10. Anyway.
Get over it.
Yeah. My office is filled. I don't know how I did this, but like everybody I work around are OU fans, and so I come in and just get the But anyway, but I bring that up as kind of a lighthearted example of the wind is in our favor moving forward. The people are on our side. And what worked in turning the tide in 2009, 2010, think about that. And I worked on the speaker staff at the Capitol then, and I will tell you that I got called into the speaker's conference room at that time because there were lawmakers and bureaucrats that worked at the state that were scared of the massive people that was on the steps of the Capitol, right? That was that 10,000 plus Tea Party gathering that happened. And why was that? Because it never happened. It never happened before. It was stuff that we read about. I mean, I want you to think about this. I'm 34 years old. My generation, the thought of a constitutional amendment is so distant to us that you might as well be talking about something that happened in 1792. Because we were never around. We don't understand what constitutional amendments and what that effort looks like and the opportunity to vote on something like that and be part of it. We hear about protests and organization and everything that would happen that would transform the posture and be a pendulum swinging moment in American political history. But we didn't experience it until 2010. And it wasn't what was said, and it wasn't certain signs that were held or what group was in charge of what or who the leader of the group was. It was the fact that tax-paying citizens said enough, took time out of the day to stand on the steps of the Capitol and said, it's time for you to listen to me, and things are going to change. And things did change. 2010, sweeping election change across this country at all levels. Oklahoma definitely was. It was like a Super Bowl year here, right? The federal level it was. Took back the House, the whole 9 yards. But so many state legislatures, so many governorships and everything shifted at that moment. And so I'm closing here with just a general comment that it truly was a moment where we all got up, stood together, and said enough is enough on principle, and then said we're going to address these issues now, but under a different posture because we're in charge, you're not in charge. And that changed the dynamic. And so I think we can do it again. I think we're on the move to do it again. I do see you all as leaders in that, so it's an honor for me to be here and talking to you, and thank you for not giving up. A lot of people went home from 2000. You're still here, and you're still going. And so thank you so much for that.
Okay, I want to ask the first question.
Please.
Other than OU winning this wonderful game this year with pure effort and brawn and football expertise, our country seems to be moving in a direction. And our state is just kind of following along. I mean, we try to be liberty-minded and freedom-minded, but with the Agenda 21 and the core curriculum and the affordable care and all these things, it just seems that there is a move to social communism in our country. We were moving that way slowly, and it's like we're on a landslide move now. What is the head of this snake? Who is the one that's pushing this?
So this is a perfect question, and I have a two-part answer for you. The first part is to understand the move that we're going on and who's behind it, but how do you stop it? Well, one of the things we have to understand is that the inherent challenge we have is that we all are working and productive members of society, so we don't have 24 hours a day to fight the fight. The side we're fighting against is paid. They're working for unions, private or public, that are getting money from the government that's taking out checks. It just goes directly to them through dues deduction. They're working for groups, or they're on the large S of the state dole. And so they get funded just to continue to do this. So there's an inherent challenge that I had when I was growing up in Mustang High School and playing basketball, my coach would always say, when you're not practicing, someone else is, right? And that's the inherent problem we have. When we're trying to make a living and provide for our families, they're still moving the ball this way. And it just becomes even harder for us. So that's one thing to understand. The other thing, who's behind all this? And we faced this challenge. In fact, we just faced an attack last week on free market think tanks that was organized by the left, the progressive left. The tentacles that George Soros has through the Tides Foundation and through a couple other sources that he has are expansive. And they go into every state. And in Colorado, the blueprint, where you had 4 or 5 billionaires that funded a bunch of organizations and dumped money in to move that state, they're trying to do that in every state. In fact, a lot of their money is going into Texas right now. But in Oklahoma, Tulsa is where a lot of this comes from. And here's the problem that we have. The biggest challenge is our organizations that were originally founded to be for free enterprise, for entrepreneurs, for businesses, groups like local chambers of commerce. when the hospital comes in and becomes your largest donor, when you look at their board and their organization membership and half of it is public sector entities, well, all of a sudden it doesn't become about private sector entities anymore, about the entrepreneur, about the small business. It becomes about which group is the big member of the organization that is living off the business models based off the government. And so, is there one person that every morning in Oklahoma is getting up and saying, this is what you do, this is what you do, this is what you do? I don't know that we have that in Oklahoma. I'm much more concerned that it's multiple parties that are all mixing in and funding each other and working together against this. And so when we stand alone, that's what we're up against. Now, the good news is, at the Capitol, and our lawmakers would know better than I do, but other states where you have someone, like at the federal level, Elizabeth Warren is leading the charge right now to try to make anyone who gives to a conservative group, making them expose their donors and then get the IRS sick. Like, she's leading that charge. We don't have someone like that inside state government that I know of that's doing that. It's coming from the federal government. But Tulsa, the city of Tulsa, and not the city itself, but in that area, that is where the majority of the push to the left is coming from. And that's when you look at state lawmakers and you look at where some of our more conservative voices coming from, you have a lot more in Oklahoma City than you do in Tulsa. And so that's one of the biggest challenges I think we face right now.
My name is Paul.
Yes.
Paul.
Yes, sir.
Mike, I have a comment and then a question. On this budget, well, first I want to say this. I think that there's a battle within the conservative ranks between pragmatists and conservative purists.
Yes, sir.
I tend to be a conservative purist. When we shut down the government, I was proud of that.
Right.
However, we've been briefed by Public Strategies. Sally missed that one because you were with your grandchildren. But it showed that Oklahoma, we took a beating on that shutdown of the government. In other words, what I'm trying to say is Oklahomans did not want the government shut down. Oklahomans did not want that, even though I was happy with it. So we took a beating on that. Now, this budget that was just passed in the House, the fix was in. Leadership had Paul Ryan to go out and announce the budget. 2 days later, the speaker got that thing passed through the House.
Didn't even go through committee.
Didn't go through committee. Even Rush Limbaugh on the radio today said he didn't have time enough to even figure out what was going on with it. So I mean, it was one of those boom, boom, get that through. And the strategy behind that is they feared another government shutdown because Republicans took a demographic beating on that shutdown of government. So again, we got these two schools, pragmatists, conservatives, and the conservative purists. So I'd just like to ask from the point of view of your organization, and we look to you for leadership because you solidify our thinking. You give us justification for what we're doing. In other words, you buttress what we do with data and good strategic thinking. So going forward, what do you think about this budget agreement, and should we be for shutting down the government because we're spending so much on these budgets? What are your thoughts about it?
Yeah, this is a fantastic question, and it comes to the central of what do we do next year, what do we do moving forward. So, two general comments to explain my thought on this. Politics is a full contact sport, as you know, and unfortunately, the majority of folks who are in elected office are not as principled and are not the pure conservatives like you are and provide your leadership. And so one of the things that the big problem I think we always fall into is saying we need to concentrate on who is on the parade float, when really what we should concentrate on is the parade route. Because the politician, what's their incentives? Their incentive, right, you talked about this earlier, is to get reelected. And how are they going to get reelected? Well, if we're worrying about who's on the float, and they're worrying about, well, what's the parade route, and what do I got to do to stay on the float, and who do I need to wave to, we're worrying about the wrong thing. And so what's happening is, as you were saying, right, the people and the entities that are directing the parade route right now are taking us down Socialist Avenue. While we're all worrying about, well, how do we get the most principled guy to stand on the float going down Socialist Attitude? And then we get mad in 4 years or 6 years when we say, well, God, I sure liked Jake. he was great. He stood for everything when he talked to me, but man, now he's just left the rest. How many years have talked about someone at the local, state, or federal level like that? What happened to him? I really loved it. I had high hopes for him or her, right? And so I would get back to, this is the notion of, let's change the parade route down Freedom Avenue. And then that's where all of a sudden you start seeing folks that are on, even Democrats that start, no, I'm a Reagan conservative Democrat, right? That's where you start seeing that conversation, because the incentive to stay in office and to win is to say, no, enough's enough. We're not going to spend this anymore. I mean, look what's happened. The incentives in Wisconsin. You had Scott Walker. Everyone said he was crazy for taking on the unions and trying to make government more efficient in his state. And he went around and he said, it's about the next generation. It's not about the next election. If I lose, I lose. In fact, when he was here, OCPA speaker, one of the points that he made is, this is my fight. I didn't choose it, but this is where God put me, and this is the opportunity He put me in, and I'm going to stand on this ground. And he won overwhelmingly, and has since been able to advance more reform since, because what happened is the parade route changed, and everybody got on board behind it. The incentives changed, and all of a sudden the lawmakers that work in Madison, their incentive changed, and most of the ones whose incentive before that was to flee to the state of Illinois to avoid the vote. You all remember that? A lot of them aren't in office anymore. And everyone that they tried to take out through a recall, even the judges, they're still in their seat because the incentives changed. And so my point would be, our incentives are off right now. Our target is off. And we need to get to a point to where, his point's exactly right. Don't think that everyone who is in Congress that represents the state of Oklahoma, that may even believe, like you do, in what we should do, and that 3 months ago was part of standing strong and fighting, that they're not looking at their re-elect numbers and what it might look like to run their district and seeing the majority of Oklahomans and where their opinion was and saying, well, we can't win if I'm not here to fight the fight. If I lose and the guy who's here is playing a totally different game, then we all lose. So I've got to stick around. So the incentives are such that they capitulate on that one and we'll live to fight another day. We have to change the incentives. Because right now, we're fighting to have the perfect person on the float. And we fight ourselves so hard that by the time we get on the float, the parade's already down the tracks. And to keep them on the float, we end up losing.
I'm going to give you a fly trap question.
Okay.
In 90 seconds,
Sir.
I want you to paint a picture for us of what liberty and freedom looked like in the 1960s and what it looks like in 2013. What are the huge differences that you recognize in these past 40 years or so?
Well, the growth and control of the federal government from that point to this point, Department of Energy, Department of Education, all these federal bureaucracies that have been created that have just made our lives worse, that have restricted freedom, and have only created more of people that are sitting in the high tower in D.C. telling you and I what our life has to be like, and then dictating. And look, 90 seconds, really?
Yeah, that's the fly trap part.
That was the part. That's my 90-second answer, but now I'm going to give you another 15 off of that. Local decisions, right? The Agenda 21, Common Core, these are all issues that are won and lost at the local level and getting enough people to understand what's going on. Where we're losing and what's happening is because what all these new, from 1960 to now, all these new federal efforts, what they're doing is they're putting all this money out on the table and they're throwing it all out. Do this and here's, X amount of dollars that you can do it with. And the biggest thing to watch out for, I'm going to use an example of where we won on this. Watch out if you ever hear a lawmaker, no matter how principled they sound, well, I think we can do this, whatever. There is no area where government can do an activity and be active that is going to advance liberty and freedom. You can't take you can't take money to set up a state exchange to make people more free and expand the consumer market. You can't expand government's presence in the classroom and create better education and create more opportunity for children. And so no matter how good they sound, if the action is one in which it involves more government and has more government funding going to it, then it's all waste. That's the biggest difference between 1960 and now of where that's coming.
I'll tell you something that I see. I'm an Agenda 21 person.
Yes, sir.
I see it and I know what's going on.
Yes, sir.
I see that we have two governments working. One that on the surface is very visual. They've stuck themselves out there so we can see what they're doing. They look like they're foundering. They look like they're just slavishly moving along. Just they have no motion. They have no function. They can't get anything going, you know. And underneath there is a shadow government that is going full bore. And they're the ones that are writing the law from outside the Constitution, from outside the normal government, the presidential executive orders, which are completely unconstitutional. The executive orders were supposed to be to protect the Constitution, not to usurp it. And that government seems like it's running full bore.
And to your point, how many of you believe that in 2016, if we elect a candidate that is the most conservative, Republican or independent or whatever, to become president, that they'll get in there and they will all of a sudden stop using executive orders, they'll roll back the cost of the EOP? How many of you believe that? Right. See, I don't either. And this is why I'm saying this is why we have to change the incentives. Because the incentives are such right now that when I get there and I'm acting and I do something, I'm operating on a totally different playing field than we're talking about.
Okay, question. You name Paul.
Hi, Paul.
You mentioned amendments.
Yes, sir.
Mark Levin has a book out about state constitution amendments. Does OCPA agree with that? There are several groups that are very much against that type of state convention.
Yeah, we're long past due with a balanced budget amendment of what we need to have. I do understand, and OCPA agrees with and understands the concern of a runaway convention. And so we have been working the last few years, and Andy Spiropoulos, that's a Milton Friedman Fellow at OCPA, OCU law professor, has worked on this quite a bit with some others with us, that you can put protections and parameters in place where it is a single subject and a single issue, and that is the only issue that can be taken up. One of the things, anyway, that matters, if you try to get an amendment that comes up through the states, that's signed and ratified by all the other states, the language has to be the same. And so you can't have a amendment process that goes through that all of a sudden we totally put a bunch of different things on there that it will fit within that system. So there are protections that we can put in place, but here's another area where Mark Levin and Dr. Coburn, who's gotten behind, and many of you may have read, you know, Coburn fought this concept, and he was worried about runaway conventions and everything for the longest time. And when OCPA would write about an Article 5 convention, balanced budget amendment, all these other issues, he would always say it's too dangerous. And about 6 months ago, right before Levin's book came out, Coburn started saying, it is too dangerous for us not to do something. Washington is morally, philosophically, it's bankrupt. It's not going to work. We can't solve it here. We've got to do more with the people rising up. And so I'm going to tell you, we have to, not should we have to get a balanced budget amendment moving forward at the federal level. And I think there's enough protections put in place to protect us, to make sure that it doesn't become a runaway convention. That's my personal opinion.
Something that everybody needs to realize is that since 2008, we have had no budget. And in defense of these guys who are trying to accept even a shaky budget in Washington right now, no budget is carte blanche to the president.
It's true.
We have to have some sort of containment, and the only way is a budget, even if it's a bad one, a budget.
So and this gets back to incentives. So how have we not had a budget? How have we had a Republican-controlled Congress? That's the power of the purse. We haven't had a budget, but we've still been funding government. It's these continuing resolutions. So the incentives right now are that if I'm a congressman and I don't fund X, Y, and Z, at least at some level, and I don't allow this one continuing resolution to go through, I suffer, the numbers look bad, I don't get reelected. We need to change the incentives to where the position of Congress is, we send you a budget. If you want to fund government, it's up to you, U.S. Senate. Vote on the budget. If you don't like the budget, we're following the Constitution. We've sent over a budget. This is how we work. We don't go with usurping the power of the Constitution for the president. We have to change those incentives.
Michael, I hear what you're saying. The name is Don with one O. Thank you. And we appreciate you coming here and talking to us, and it's been great. And we really like your organization. And just as a commercial for you guys.
Yes, sir.
Instead of giving to some political party like the Republicans, give some money to OCPA. They
Thank
do
you,
better.
sir. And it's tax deductible.
Right. Anyway, my question is, we hear you and we understand what you're saying, but we, the grassroots, did not leave the Republican Party. The Republican Party left us. The RNC does not follow their own platform. The Republicans in Oklahoma do not follow their own platform. And the platforms are good. They're very good. They should be followed. Now, how can they ask us to support them when they don't do what they're supposed to do? They're supposed to be conservative, but they're not. They don't vote that way. They don't act that way. So why should we support them? And that's why we have the problem we have. It's a disconnect, and it's the leadership that's got to come back to us. If they don't, there's not going to be a Republican Party, period. And I can't help but that.
No, you're right. You're right. And so here is how I would address that concern. The first part is, and it gets to this kind of idea of incentives. One of the things we've done with Liberty Foundation, in 9 different states, we fought the Medicaid expansion battle. And Florida is a perfect example of where Governor Scott, who first said no, then turned around and said, yeah, we'll take the money. And then the legislature voted to not let him do it, push back on the governor, push back on. Well, why did the legislature do that? Because we went in and we ran a poll and asked Republican primary voters where they felt on the issue, if they'd be willing to vote for a challenger in the next election on this issue. And the numbers were in favor of yes. This was a very high issue. And so we took that information to lawmakers, but then when we held meetings like this, we met in the precinct that was most important for that lawmaker to get reelected. And it wasn't just our group, but we invited 1 or 2 other people that were kind of involved from the grassroots to get them in to have that conversation. And so what happened is, if I'm a lawmaker, I've got in my district, and I've got several communities and cities, and I know where my votes come from and what the good walking district is and where my support base is and everything else. And if an area that is critical to me that I know of all of a sudden starts spiking up, right? This is Samuel Adams' brush fires in the Mines of Men. And it starts spiking up in that area, well, that hurts. That's like getting kicked in the shin in a particular area that I don't want to be kicked in. And so that's an incentive that changes behavior. And that's how, while they're there, how can you change their activity? The other thing I would suggest to you, and look, here's an issue that I know some of you are passionate about that OCPA hasn't been engaged in, but the issue of nullification, right? Nullification was a big topic last year. So in that effort, a big push came out of Enid. And Mark Irwin and Craig Steiger, Clark Steiger, I don't know if you all know these guys, they led the charge. Well, they got involved in that issue, and some of the folks that put resources in backing that were 2 of the biggest Republican Party donors in the history of the state of Oklahoma. And so you had some very influential people putting resources into the Republican Party that were back behind that issue. But the connection between those 2 when it comes to party activity and convention and everything else, that never happened. Again, the incentive kind of organization. But I just say that to say there's promise here that just as much as that party may be fractured and may be suffering, you also have, I don't think it's a particular issue where you have grassroots over here and you've got a bunch of big money controlling things over here. I think a lot of your folks in Oklahoma that are putting money into campaigns and everything, we're actually seeing going into this next cycle, contributions to Republican candidates are actually across the board are down. Now hopefully a couple are seeing increases, but they're down across the board from what we've seen in the last few cycles. Giving has gone down. That's telling you that the people that write checks, like many of you all there in this room, are not writing the same check. So I think there's promise. There's an opportunity there to tap in and link up with folks. And I'll be honest, I don't know enough about the new chairman, Dave Weston. I met him, seems great. I don't know about the direction of the party. OCPA is, since we're nonpartisan, we're C3, we can't interact and do a lot with the party, so I don't know enough to speak on present moving forward.
Hi, Michael. My name is Woody. That's with 2 O's.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for coming.
Good to see you. Thank you.
One comment, another question. The comment is, as far as the any constitutional convention or any members of the Constitution, we have a federal government out there that does not abide the Constitution as it stands. So I don't think changing it anything is going to help. Although there's a lot of changes I'd like to make, I'd like to see made, with one being the 17th Amendment law. Now, you're talking about incentives for people to vote. You have those who work for a living and those who vote for a living.
Yes, sir.
Now,
Unfortunately.
we've got to change those incentives around from those people who are voting for a living to working for a living. And the only way we're going to do that is to get rid of all of these government programs to support all these people who vote for a living. They've put themselves in political servitude. We need to change that somehow. How do we do that?
Yes, agreed 100%. And the two go together. So to your first point, and trust me, I agree 100%. The government that we have today, especially the federal government, us passing a balanced budget amendment, it may not make them change, but Barack Obama's going to laugh at that. But here's what happens. When you have 3/4 of the states, that you have the citizens author something from the voters up, and they band together, what you start to create is all of a sudden, that's where governors that right now may slough this question, you start having a balanced budget amendment push in their state and a call to have a balanced budget, all of a sudden you're going to start seeing governors saying, by God, we need to balance the budget and we need the federal government to get in control. Because what do? We change their incentive. And then as those states start offering that up, guess what Congress starts to do? They start looking at the numbers that right now say the public doesn't want to shut down government. They look at numbers and say 81% of my voters want to balance the federal budget. Well, guess what I better do in this next budget cycle? That is how we change incentive. And so it's almost, again, my coach, right? Practice. When you're not practicing, someone else is. He used to tell me, you've got to shoot free throws, muscle memory, if you want to be good at it in a game. Well, it's the same thing. If we go through that effort and you mobilize the public and you mobilize the voters and get them together to push an amendment issue, and that happens in several states, you change the incentives and you'll then change the behavior, or else they won't be there. That's part of what we did. That's why everyone getting on the steps of the Capitol in 2010, that's what we did. We mobilized voters and citizens, and we changed the incentives and the behavior, and look at the results that came from that then. It's not happening now. We've got to get back to it, and I think a balanced budget amendment is a way to send that message.
Another question.
Yes, sir. Thank you for the
Hi,
question.
thank you for being here. My name is
Thank you, sir.
Jerome, and I've been head up the Americanist Education and Action Study Group, and you hit on two big things that we fight against, and that is Agenda 21, Common Core, just to name a few.
Yes, sir.
One of the things to think about is the public and private partnership aspect of the granddaddy of them all is the Federal Reserve Bank system. That is the granddaddy of the public and private partnership, and we know what the story is there. But that's really not what I'm going to get it with. It's Common Core. Common Core is a public and private partnership set up by the CCSSO and the NGA, the National Governors Association. And what we've got to do is we've got to stop this thing, because it will be the oxygenator to fan socialism, communism, and all the other New World Order ideas that are coming down the pike. So what we've got to do is to kill it. Do you think that we can kill it, A? And B, if we cannot kill it, there is a provision in there, a deviation factor. I'd like to see a 25% so that we can modify and put in stuff from the American Opinion Foundation, expand that 15% to 25%. Do you think that's possible? Do you think we can kill this monster?
So candidly, I'm going to tell you yes, because I always think organized people in a representative democracy that get engaged and are committed to something can have an impact. But what I'm going to tell you, you're not going to like. I don't think that you can beat Common Core by fighting it the way we're fighting it right now. Common Core, the impact of Common Core is at the local level in your local school. And Mustang is not going to do the same thing as Enid or Edmond under Common Core. Even with that, the decisions end up being made locally. And so what our position at OCPA has been is that the way you win these fights and the way that we get there is, number one, we have to empower every citizen with control over their education, their children's education, so that they can say, this is unacceptable, I'm going to go over here. And then as you change those incentives and you change that structure, all of a sudden Mustang High School loses half its students and half its funding, and is not out with, clearly the people in that community don't like it, and the school board members get changed over that. And I say that because my concern is, we fought real hard, we had a big push across the country, and we stopped cap and trade at the federal level, right? Beat the bill, didn't even get it there, the vote didn't, right? Wrong. It's coming through in 50 different forms right now. And if Scott Pruitt was here today, or Congressman Langford, this being his district, they would tell you about the fights and the calls and everything they're taking about the EPA and all the regulations, everything that was written into cap and trade. So you try to fight it when it's this big issue. You fight Common Core right here and you try to beat it right here. It's going to come back, and the only way you're going to win is at the local level. When the local community, that's the same way with Agenda 21, like you said. It's when the Norman community stood up over a year or two ago. It's in Edmond, the same way that it's been happening. That's where you stop it. That's where you turn the attention, because you're changing the incentives for the mayor and the city council members and everyone else. If it's just something we fight at the faraway land and then it gets behind us and it starts getting put in, how many of your families in your neighborhood do you think the parents actually know what's in the textbooks of their children that they bring home? See, so as we're fighting them and telling them the Common Core is going to destroy everything and it's putting this stuff in there, they don't even know what you're talking about, because we're not paying attention at home. And so we've got to win the battle there. And so to answer your question, yes, I think you could win. I think we can win. But I think we have to fight it on a different battlefield. Sure.
Question.
David, the Republicans have been in charge of the state for 3 sessions and have increased spending over $800 million. Where do you see a way to convince them to quit spending so much money? And do you have anyone in favor of getting rid of the state income tax?
We do. And what we saw, this is a great question, because 2 years ago, we sat there and we thought, we just had a governor, her state of the state, announced that she wanted to phase out the state's income tax. We had 17 bills were filed that year, and what ultimately ended up happening is I think there were a total of 37 lawmakers that signed on as co-authors to legislation to phase out the state's income tax over 10 years. If I explained that to you, that was going to happen next year, we'd feel pretty good. I mean, statewide Republican control, every time we get a push card from a Republican, or every time the Republican Party has their convention, by God, one of the top 3 platform issues is we're going to reduce taxes, right? How did it fail miserably? So miserably, nothing happened. And nothing happened because those of us that were for it ended up having to fight in the very last hours of session against it, because the version that got cooked up would have raised taxes on 33% of the Oklahoma public.
That's right.
What kind of math, who's doing this, right? So what we've done over the past 2 years, and in fact, just this week, OCPA launched a partner organization, OCPA Impact, an advocacy group, going across the state to light fires in districts as a C4, because they can do what we can. But around this point, because what we found, we had in Ardmore, we had a town hall kind of meeting where we were talking about this, and we talked about the income tax issue, and the lawmaker that was there, a Republican lawmaker, said, look, I'm for it, but, and they started talking through the incentives. They started talking through who called their office when that tax bill came up, right? It was the superintendent. It was, the local bureaucrat. It was this and that. And they weren't hearing from the citizens. And they started talking about, but we got to worry about this, and what are we going to do on this? And they started giving all these examples. Well, guess what happened? Somebody stood up in the audience and said, none of that doesn't, I voted for you. You told me you were going to cut taxes, and if I had 5% more, here's what I'd do for it. And Bob, what would happen if I had more money to buy new tires at your shop at the end of this year? Well, Bob, if I had that kind of business, I'd hire 3 more people. And this conversation started happening. And after we left, within a week, that lawmaker called and said, I want to run the tax bill next year. The incentives changed like that. So what we learned was, it doesn't matter if you have a Republican governor and a bunch of Republicans that sign on before session to legislation. It matters if you have people banging their door and demanding what can happen. And what we found all across the state is that it is an important issue. That's why we've invested, got behind it. You'll see a big push. And I definitely believe that it is within the near future that we will see a massive tax cut package go through the state of Oklahoma. And let me explain real quickly why I say that. Since 2010, there was a transformational year that happened. Up until that point, you had a lot of leaders who are Republicans that had governed from the minority. They were used to negotiating. And I'm saying this isn't just elected officials. This is a lot of staff that work in state government. They're used to negotiating to get something done. So what we started seeing happen in 2010 and 11, you'd have these great, conservative ideas pushed forward, and the very first thing is they'd start negotiating with themselves. Who are you negotiating with? You run everything. You want to cut taxes? Cut taxes. This is not hard. And it's a behavior. But what's happened 2010, 2012, now going into 2014, term limits, you're bringing in fresh blood. You're bringing in new lawmakers with new passions that don't have this institutional bias for negotiating and playing to the middle or to some special interest. And so every year, more and more votes come toward that. And I think we're going to start to see more support toward that. Look, the Speaker of the House, T.W. Shannon, some of the things he said last session, think about it. You had a speaker publicly stand up in session and say, government does not belong in health care. Those were his exact words. Could you have pictured the two previous Republican speakers or three saying that?
No.
Okay, so incentives have changed, behavior has changed. And so now, is it going to happen next year? They'll know better than I do. And
Were you
John,
pointing at Sally in particular when you
yes,
said that?
yeah. Yeah, in fact, I should stop and tell you, you've been patiently waiting for the question, so I apologize.
I want to make fun of Sally for just a second, okay? How many people who stood up and asked a question did I tell you to make it short or keep it to a question? How many of you did I say that to? Okay, just want to make sure. They're all. It was most everybody. I'm going to hold the microphone so I can take it back.
Well, I'm Sally.
Yes,
and
ma'am.
my question deals with the income tax. But
Yes.
before I get to that, I want to address Jerome's part B of his question about the 15%. It doesn't matter whether you made it 15%, 20, 25, 30%. The test will only cover what the Common Core wants covered. So you could add whatever you want, and it wouldn't matter. Anyway, moving on.
That's an important point.
Regarding the income tax, I've been hearing some talk about, okay, our general revenue fund is going to be flat. Our money hasn't been coming in with, sales tax have been kind of up and down. We've been having to, the people's income tax refunds are so high, and so we aren't going to have very much money. And so the argument is, from those on the left, is cutting income taxes is bad. It's hurting our government. So we're going to hear that this session. Would you address that?
Yes. Since the state started cutting income taxes, and we've cut it 20%, coming down from 7.0 down to 2.25, as we've gone through those income tax cuts, every tax collection cycle that we went into was higher than the year before, except for the year with the recession, where we had some other factors that went in there. But what that's telling you is what we all understand to be true about economics, right? You cut taxes, you put more back into the economy, well, I'll be darned, revenue comes up. In fact, we set 4 records for all-time income tax collections. Think about that. Cut income tax, but the collections for income tax receipts to the state went higher. We set 4 records. For state sales tax collections, we had 5 records. In fact, this last year was the all-time high. More money, more people, right, consuming, and where the revenue comes. This last year was the first year, and I say this last year, you have to think in terms of there's calendar year and fiscal year. So this is the fiscal year that we're on that came off of the first session where we did not continue that quarter cut every year that we would go through. And what's happened? We haven't had the same type of activity, right? So to our point, we have to continue to remain competitive, and if you incentivize the behavior you want, and you disincentivize the behavior that you don't want. And if we want a stronger growing economy, if we want more people spending the economy and having opportunity, that's what we should be incentivizing. The incentives at the state capitol right now are more so of, I can't cut education budget. Well, why not? Nothing's happening with it anyway. And spending on education has gone like this, and results have flatlined for the past, since 1972? We've gone back that far. It's not working, but we're spending more and more. So why is it okay, and why are we worried about that? Why aren't we thinking that, gosh, this isn't working, and so children are not better off? If I cut taxes and left money in people's pockets, maybe they could afford a better education for their kids. So education would improve and our economy would improve, right? We've got to change the incentives and move to that conversation. But this is exactly what you'll hear, and the misinformation, and from groups that, we had last time, we had the Oklahoma Ranchers Association that put something out that said, if Mary Fallon's tax cut bill goes through, property taxes on ranchers would triple. And that came from, right, that's what the left put out, that was their big thing, because that'll scare you, right? Because their mindset, well, we've got to feed the beast, we've got to fund government, so if we take $1 from here, we've got to jack it up here. And so they start that conversation, and that's what was getting out there. And we wouldn't have to increase property taxes. And besides the fact the state of Oklahoma couldn't go through and do that. There's a local issue that has to do with that, with your property taxes at the local level. And so that's what we end up having to fight. And so she's right, trust me. For every one of us that says right now that is telling the lawmaker that we want our taxes cut, they're hearing from 17 different off the dole that don't want to see it happen with a bunch of excuses. But we are there, we're going to fight it. We're devoting our resources, our organization, and we started up a second organization just to fight this issue and give you guys some cover.
Okay, here's the last question. It's gonna be
Sure.
short. We talk a lot in
short.
platitudes. I'll make it short, it's gonna be a question, okay? We talk a lot of platitudes about where we were a few years ago, 20 years ago, 50 years
Yes,
ago,
sir.
100 years ago, and we look at where we are now. Is there any way to go back, and do we want to go back?
Go back in terms of...
In terms of the old
Sure.
government, you know, the back into World War II to the Wilson Truman back in those years, or even further back. Do we want to go back to the Lincoln years with our government? Or can we, are we okay where we're at? We just need to work what we have.
Because of technology and because of just innovations and changes that happen with culture, you had a culture at the foundation of this country where people were willing to die and sacrifice everything they had for freedom and for the taste of freedom. And I'm not sure the American culture today is like that. And here's why I say that. Because we may get people to band up on one issue or two issues, or they may get mad about this, but just as concerned as we were about the most conservative person getting elected president and then behaving badly because the incentives aren't right, well, that means that the public is not going to be paying attention and staying there on everything. And so can we go back? I don't think so. Can tomorrow be better than today? Absolutely. And can tomorrow be better than it was then? I mean, gosh, with technological innovation, we should not be building so many public schools and colleges. With digital learning and all those opportunities, we don't even need to have as many bureaucrats and state government workers as we do today. Why is and now I'm on my hires, you guys. Why is the state of Oklahoma right now having a conversation about public employee pay is too low? They have a better pension system and compensation system than all of us in this room combined could ever have. And number two, I remember, because I worked for the state, right? This wasn't when I go to OCPA now, I'm in the office by 7 and I'm working after dinner at night after the kids go to bed. State government, if you're there at 4:30, you're turning out the lights. You're the last one, right? And so why are we having a conversation about paying public employees, bureaucrats more, when we're not willing to talk about giving you some of your hard-earned money back? And
Well,
so
just keep it.
yes, or just keep it to begin with. And so I think that we have the opportunity for tomorrow to not only be better than today, but to be better than it was then as well. Because, man, you put the American spirit, don't back the American spirit into a corner. And that's what's happening right now. And when that becomes unleashed, not only will you have a paradigm shift in representative democracy, but you'll also have, from that entrepreneurial spirit, a new way of totally doing things that'll make the 1860 and 1960 look like something we don't even want to imagine. But that's a fantastic question. I remain hopeful. I wouldn't be involved in this if I didn't. I'd be trying to go make $1 million and disappear to some island that's not going to tax me as much, just take care of my family. But I believe more in this country. Again, how'd I start? I was raised by 2 World War II veterans and taught me about patriotism and the opportunity and the value of this country. And I'm not giving up, and I don't think you are either. So,
Ladies and gentlemen, Michael Carnuccio, thank you very much. That's it for today's High Noon Club. Thank you, our guys, for being here.